Good morning, Moms and Master Books. We hope you're having a fantastic week. Hey, this morning I am here with Kate Hannon, formerly known as Kate Loop, the author of the Principles of Mathematics series and the upcoming Algebra 2 mathematics course, which we'll talk about. So good morning, Kate. It's good to have you joining me.
It's great to be here.
So you just got married.
I did.
And you changed your name instead of him changing his name, even though you're more famous at this point. So the question that I had to ask, because I said I was going to, is what color bath towels do you have in your bathroom?
Well, it was an easy decision because my favorite color is purple, and my second favorite is green, and his favorite color is green. So we have purple and green.
All right. See, we can learn a lot about you from that thing. If it was white, it's kind of basic and plain, and all of those things. So just
they're muted purples and muted greens, not big bright ones.
Okay. And again, we learn a lot about you from that process. That's good. All right. So one of my favorite courses is our Principles of Mathematics course. I think you did a brilliant job with that, in that the worldview, it's just, there's nothing like it anywhere in the market. What is your backstory? Like, what led you to the place that you would even want to write a math curriculum?
Yeah, it was certainly not something I had ever pictured doing growing up. I was brought up in a Christian homeschooling family, and we saw God in science and history, but math was just this neutral subject, or so we thought. And I did good at it, but I didn't understand when I got to algebra why I was really learning what I was learning. And then as a senior, my mom had me read a book called Mathematics is God Silent. And I started it really skeptical, thinking, what is he going to talk about? Like how God divided the Red Sea, and you can talk about that when you teach division, or how could math really, apart from a Bible verse splashed on a page, really be taught from a biblical worldview? And I was blown away to discover that really math's whole existence is dependent upon God. It's because he is faithfully holding all things together day in and day out that we can even call it a fact that 2 + 2 is going to equal 4. And that when you look at it from that perspective, all of math transforms. It's not just meaningless bookwork. It's a way of describing God's creation, and it's integrated with science and history and a part of that bigger picture. And all of it screaming out at us that God is still faithful. That's why math is still working, and you can rely on it because you can rely on him. And so I just wanted everybody to see that. And I realized that by missing it all those years, I'd really been buying into humanistic and naturalistic thinking, because I was ascribing those consistencies that I saw in math just to math itself or to nature itself, which is really humanism and naturalism in disguise. And so I really didn't want kids seeing it that way and missing out on the joy of using math to explore God's creation. So I started writing a book. People kept telling me, you should write something that's simple that we can understand. So I wrote a book, and then that led to another book, and then that eventually led to a full curriculum.
And so the, like junior high, how did you end up in the junior high range?
Sure. So when we were looking at junior high, is just a perfect transition point because students have like the elementary and they're trying to transition up into high school. And so it's a perfect spot to kind of take a couple years to really firm up the foundations and see them biblically, and then get a big picture overview of what's coming next and how all that fits into the big picture and proclaims God's praises too.
Okay, so you were homeschooled, right? And you know that in the real world there was independent study works really well for a lot of families. And this book is really, the math series, Principles of Mathematics, is really, it's designed for independent learning, for the student to actually guide themselves and learn it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the independence, some people will say there's a lot of reading. How would you address that?
So it is designed for the student to go through it on their own. There's a lot of reading because it reads more like a science book in that it brings in a lot of math applications. So I didn't want to just throw equations and rules at students without them understanding what was really happening. So it shows it to them in action, and they're reading about how it applies, or the history of the concept and how it was developed. So it's not like they're reading tons of equations. They're reading about math in context. Mm-hmm. And if students do have trouble, if they're not readers, I did create an e-course that's available on my website that kind of takes out some of the reading so that they can watch and see the lessons and then just spot read in their textbook as they need to.
And do you have interaction with the students as well in that course? Like, are you direct interaction?
So I'm presenting the concept in pre-recorded videos that they watch. So they would watch a video. If they have questions, they can email me, but mainly it's watching a video, and then they look at a few things in their textbook and do their worksheet.
What would you say is the biggest challenge that you see in working with students, or your emails? What would be the biggest friction point that students would have?
Fractions.
Okay.
Fractions definitely it's one of the first more abstract concepts that they're having to get their mind around. Mm-hmm. And what I see often happen is if students didn't get fractions and they kept going on, then when they hit pre-algebra or algebra, they're lost. And it's because they didn't have that foundation to begin with. So math is very cumulative.
Yes.
And that's kind of one of the big important things to make sure they've got.
Do you see, with Math Lessons for a Living Education, most of the curriculums follow a pretty standard scope and sequence, right? But when we bring in, Math UC is one that we seem to have the most frustration, where people coming in from Math UC, because of the way that it teaches it, the students struggle the most and usually have to go back a level or two because of that. So do you see any? I would imagine anybody coming from, say, Saxon, Horizons, teaching textbooks, they're going to transition fairly smooth as long as they grasp the concepts. Would you agree with that?
In the principles of mathematics?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wrote it knowing that people were probably going to be transitioning from a variety of curriculums. So I tried in book one, if you start in book one, it really tries to fill in any gaps that might have happened because of different scopes and sequences. So it's not assuming any knowledge, it's going on ahead and covering whatever they need.
Okay. Yep.
Just at a quick pace if it's something they've probably seen before, but it's still there for those that didn't see it before. So I would say that as long as you go slow, if something is new for your child in that section, it should fill in those gaps from coming from different curriculums.
Okay, so there's a fair amount of re-instruction in the course.
There is, but it's done while building the biblical worldview, so it doesn't feel like re-instruction. So while they review place value, for example, they're learning about how different cultures did place values, and they're seeing how the computer operates off of a binary place value. So there's lots of new things and new material that's really building their problem-solving skills.
Okay.
And their ability to see math as something outside of the textbook and part of God's creation, while at the same time making sure that they really do have those foundations all filled in. Because like I said, math is cumulative, and if they're missing something in those foundational levels, then they're going to end up snowballed later on. Right. So I was really trying to make sure we filled in the gaps there. And that's if you start in book one. Book two assumes a knowledge of arithmetic that book one does not.
So if a student is maybe a struggling math learner, they do well maybe to start in Math 1, and even if it's in an accelerated schedule, just to get the coverage, the review, make sure they have the foundation set. That would probably be a good idea for a student.
I would say so. And there is an accelerated schedule in the book to show students how to go through, it's designed to be a whole year curriculum for each book. But there is one to get you through in 6 months if you're doing it with an older student who's just struggling and needs to firm up those foundations. Okay.
Now, I recommend it. What I was told by somebody, and it made sense to me, but that books 1 and 2 is the equivalent of an algebra half or a pre-algebra course. So if you did the books 2, you're well prepared to go into, you have a solid foundation, go into algebra in 9th grade or as a next level course. The one thing that I've seen is families will get to 9th grade or 10th grade and the student is just overwhelmed and struggling but they feel the pressure to make the student do algebra because that's what you do in ninth grade. The parents who have basically said, you know what I care about most is having the student just learn the math where they are and gone back to one in doing that, even if it's 10th grade. Those parents have come back and said, it was the best decision we made. I realize they're not 4 years into math, but the object of pushing them through like algebra without having the basic skills or even understanding application, they really seem to feel that was the best way to do it.
I've heard that from a lot of students as well, especially those that are struggling because they're in math that's way below their level, and so they're feeling bad about that. But when they switch to principles of mathematics, there is enough like application and interesting things that are new that they no longer feel like they're repeating themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But they are getting those foundations so that when they finish book 2, they're really equipped to use math in most everyday settings, and have a pretty good, solid understanding of the basics it's called pre-algebra, but I go a little further than a lot of pre-algebra in trying to just make sure that they really understand some of the different branches of math. They have a little sneak peek at trigonometry, they have a sneak peek at consumer math and interest rates, just to really make sure that they're equipped.
And it's very applied as well, right? I mean, so it's not just here's pages and pages of practice problems, it's a lot of application and understanding.
Correct.
Which is why I think students that are having a hard time, there's so much critical thinking that happens. 4th, 5th, 6th grade, the student is moving into much more critical thinking, and then you get into that junior high, and when you haven't made that transition to the application in that, and then all of a sudden we move to algebra, and we expect students to have those critical thinking skills and the application. If they haven't developed that, algebra means nothing. It's like speaking a foreign language without understanding what the words you're speaking are. I say that from personal experience. 3 times through algebra, and I still don't know how to say where's the bathroom in another language, if you know what I mean. So.
Well, and just to piggyback on that, so in algebra, all of a sudden they're dealing with letters, and a lot of students are left wondering, like, what in the world do I care what x equals, and how to, what all this is. And so in the book 2 is where it really develops more dealing with unknowns, and it'll give them example meanings. So as they're starting to work with letters, it'll tell them, like, this is what you could be representing, so that they understand that those letters are really representing real life consistencies and how to use them, so that when they get to those algebra books, they're not overwhelmed and lost.
Yes. So I think the other thing that I admire about what you did in the course, our worldview comes through, but so does our energy for the course, the excitement for the course, for the topic. And I think that you did a really good job of not bringing anxiety into the course. If you know what I mean, a lot of times in homeschooling, math and sciences are those intimidating subjects. And we tend to bring the anxiety or the apprehension, math is hard. We start with a math is hard concept, and then that's the tone, the brain that we go into the topic with. I think you did a really good job of making it math is fun and approachable because of what we're discovering and we're learning, and this is how we do it. And I think it almost relaxes the student. I know when my son went through it, it was almost like it's just a very relaxed, fun course. There's nothing big about this. It's the same as if I was learning about history. It's not, oh my goodness, now we got to do math, put on a new hat. We better pray 3 prayers because this is going to be the most difficult thing we face today.
Right. And I think some of it, like if you were to picture teaching your child how to cook from a textbook only without ever letting them go into the kitchen, a child would think they hated cooking, right? And might even fear or dread their cooking lessons. But they're never really cooking. They're just studying a textbook, without any idea how to actually get their hands dirty in the kitchen. And so that's what often happens in math is kids they develop that fear and anxiety because they're just being taught for 8 years in a textbook without really getting a chance to understand what they're doing, which is frustrating. When you don't understand something, you wonder why you're learning it, and it does build up that frustration. But when you see it as part of God's creation and it's taught in that way, it takes away a lot of that.
Yeah.
That fear makes it that exciting
Yeah.
journey.
Well, I spoke a little bit about this on the weekend. I did a post about confirmation biases that we tend to have, and that we need to be careful as parent educators that we don't bring forward the confirmation bias that we have, that math is hard. It should be something to be anxious about. We'll be lucky if we make it. You know, I've noticed parents who they tend to be more math oriented or science oriented. So do their students, but I think it's because they're not intimidated by it. It's just the expectation is it's going to be, we're fine. This is what we do. And so in a course like Approaching Math, it's just very important that as parent educators, we allow the course to be successful on its own without bringing our biases into it. If that makes sense. So, okay, so when it comes to math lessons or principles for mathematics, if there's a parent on the fence, if you're at the booth right now and she's looking at this math course and she's trying to decide, does she switch from teaching textbooks into principles of mathematics, what would you say?
Well, I would probably find out a little bit more about them to customize that answer, but just that this is a course that is going to help them see God in math and the whole big picture. So like rather than just learning the facts, they're going to understand how those facts are describing his creation. They're going to be building their biblical worldview as they're studying. They're going to be seeing math in context with history. They're going to be seeing it with art, with music, with, you know, all these different real life applications so that they really understand what it's about and are equipped to use it in their own life. And if that's what the parent wants, then, you know, that's what this is. And I wrote it because I really believed passionately that there needed to be something like that out there, because there really isn't anything like that out in the marketplace. And I had grown up not seeing God in math, and I missed out on this incredible treasure. I mean, children should be finishing their math for the day, not going, oh man, I hate math, but going, wow, God's amazing. And it should be building up their biblical worldview and making them realize, hey, they can trust God. And so that's what this course really tries to accomplish.
Good, good. I would add that the way the course is written as well is going to be open and go. So for a parent, when you get there, the instructions are there, the daily schedule is there. It's very easy to administer this course. From the moment you pull it out of the box, within a few minutes, you're basically teaching math. It's not a lot behind that. In that it was written for the homeschool environment. That a lot of curriculums were designed for a classroom environment, so there's either a lot of drill and kill or there's a lot of instruction required. And when you have a family like our family size was 9 kids at one time, I think Kristen was homeschooling 6 kids, it would have been impossible for her to teach math alone if the students didn't have something that was designed for independence and kind of with the homeschool mom in mind. So some of the math curriculums that we've seen that have overwhelmed parents were designed for a classroom, and they were designed for a classroom of all 9th graders or maybe all junior high students, whatever. Our math curriculums are designed so that while you're sitting at the table, you can have multiple ages and students are using the books that are best for them without mom actually having to teach all that material. So that would be the other thing that I would kind of push on, just the practical application as well as the spiritual application. And I think now we're far enough down the road where we've seen the success stories. So when you first launch a product, you keep your fingers crossed and you think, well, I have a good theory and I'm really hoping it works. I feel like your math course now is proven. We've seen standardized test scores. We've seen parents who had struggling math learners come back and say, oh my goodness, this has changed our lives. My kid loves math and they're going into algebra. They're not afraid anymore. They're not negative, those things. We've seen testimony after testimony of kids who really discovered God in the math, that it brought to life the fact that math is more than just numbers. It's the language God uses to bring order and purpose to the universe, and as we discover math, we discover more about him. So there's that, the apologetic application of it. So you've you've kind of moved out of the rank of, do you think this works, into, yeah, I know it works, right? So there's a little bit of that we can have a little bit of a swagger now, because we've seen the proof in the pudding, so to speak, where families are using it, and it is proving effective. So I'm going to brag on you, if that's okay. Now,
I just, the Lord that he's using it, because that's been prayer. I mean, going back to your previous question about what led me to pick that age range, one big thing was that in junior highs, when kids are often trying to decide if they're going to make their faith their own, and trying to figure out, do they really believe it? Do they just believe it because mom and dad said it?
yes.
And so it was just an age where I felt like it was super important to build that biblical worldview.
Yes. It is. It's an apologetics math course where, I mean, 100% we will stand behind our faith builder guarantee that if the faith of your child does not grow as a result of using this course, it's money back, no questions asked. And we have moms who are buying this, who are intimidated by math or didn't understand the purpose of math, who are just buying the student book and reading it and growing in their faith. I mean, there's a lot of testimonies now that we get from that as well. So I'm that aspect, as far as the effectiveness of this course, I would put this course up against any other course in homeschool culture or anywhere else, and know that it's going to do what it's supposed to do academically, spiritually, and accomplish all that it's supposed to. So. And I know that there's nothing else like it. I know that the courses that have effective math in it, they weren't designed necessarily for the homeschool environment, or they weren't written for the apologetics nature and revealing the character of God. I don't know of any other curriculum that does that all in one package, so good. All right, so we have that. Is there anything else you'd like to add on Principles of Mathematics?
I think you got it.
Good. And then, so let's talk a little bit about the future, because let's see, algebra. Okay. So Master Books was able to acquire Jacob's algebra and geometry. Now, for 30 plus years, those have been kind of the gold standard. We have charter schools that use those curriculums. We have the algebra and the geometry course have been used. Just it's a unique approach, and so we were able to get a solution for people relatively quickly with those two courses, and we have a solution there. And then as well, we had the DVD course with Dale Callahan and the Ask Dr. Callahan series that helps people through those courses. So then we come to Algebra 2, and what's the solution going to be? Well, and one of the things, and Kate, I'll get your opinion on this as well, but one of the things Dr. Callahan says is when you get to algebra, geometry, algebra and trig, any of these higher level courses, the principles or the foundations are pretty, like if you take a solid Algebra 1 course or you take a solid geometry course, teachers have a lot of flexibility in being able to choose what course and what coursework they choose for that, but it should prepare you to also move into any other level or any other textbook type approach. So even though they're not all written by the same author, the principles and the foundations of those, if they were effective, should prepare you to move into that next course. So ultimately, we would love to, once we finish up the math, look at going backwards and having an Algebra 1 and a geometry course as well with the same flavor and that type of thing. But I think right now, because we have such a solid foundation in Algebra 1 and geometry, the decision was, let's jump forward to have a really good Algebra 2 course. And I think is it Trig 2 that we're doing?
No, hopefully pre-calculus right after,
Okay.
which will include a lot of trigonometry.
Okay. So so now you're not writing this course by yourself.
No, I have my husband has his doctorate from MIT in a science field, and so he is helping and co-authoring it with me.
Okay. So So the heart of this course, I know you're in the beginning of it, and you started writing some of it. In fact, I think we're even going to do some testing with it, right? I think my son gets to do some testing on some of it. Yeah, he's excited about that so much.
Okay.
So
I'm just thankfully willing to do math over the summer.
Yeah, well, he's one of those kids. He's always enjoyed math, and so yeah, for him it's a fun challenge.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on the course and kind of where you're going with the new Algebra 2.
Okay. Well, I'm excited because algebra was like the subject when I was growing up that I had no clue why we were doing all these X's and Y's, and to be able to write an algebra course where, as we teach the concepts, they are going to see it in application, and they're going to be prepared. We're calling it Applied Algebra 2, at least that's the working title right now, because they will be learning how to apply it and really getting to see it as part of God's creation. Like on the very first day, they get to explore the blood flow in a giraffe, and how when you look at math and you look at the pressure that's on that giraffe because of how tall its neck is, it has to have special features in order to survive, and God gave it just those features that it needs. And it's math that helps us see this handiwork all around us, and so the kids are going to actually get to see that it's fun writing at the algebra level because they finally know enough math to really explore a lot of equations and aspects of God's creation that they couldn't do earlier on. And so they're going to get like a front row seat into God's design, and
awesome.
as they get to learn how to work with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it'll be a lot of application, kind of in the same format, written to the student, and so it'll have a lot of the principles of mathematics look.
It will. It'll be the same type of idea. There'll be a lesson, and then they'll work a worksheet. There'll be a keeping perspective that kind of summarizes what we're really doing and how it all fits back into the worldview. And unlike the early on, so like in principles of mathematics, there's a lesson every day and a worksheet every day. Here, there'll be a lesson every other day most of the time, so that they have a little bit longer to digest the concept, and then 2 worksheets to go with that same lesson. So they're really getting a little bit more review, just because the concepts are a little bit, it's algebra 2. So we're giving them a little bit longer with each thought.
Okay.
But it's the same general format. There'll be a schedule to finish in 6 months if you have a really advanced student that wants to do pre-calculus and algebra 2 in the same year, or there'll be a schedule to do it in the full year, which is the normal rate of speed. And I'm excited because when Master Books, when I first finished Principles of Mathematics, Master Books had asked me, would you write high school math? And I said, no, I'm not going to do high school math unless God sends me someone to co-author with me. And I was not at all thinking a husband. And then the Lord sends me a husband who always wanted to write math curriculum, who got his doctorate specifically because he wanted to show God's glory in math and science to students. And so here we are.
That is cool. That's cool. Yeah, I'm kind of struck by that. That's I believe that Master Books is been called by the Lord to serve a generation, to prepare them to take on giants that we never imagined taking on. As culture begins to change and moral relativism and all of these things begin to change, students having solid foundations and able to defend their faith and to step into callings that are challenging, but where they can actually impact the world. And our prayer continues to be that the Lord would bring authors and projects and all of these resources so that we're equipped to do that. So if that means that he has to marry you off to do that, then we praise him for that. So that's an awesome testimony. I think that's great. And like I say, we would love to come back to the Algebra 1 and the geometry, and once we kind of, like you kind of have that in mind as well, right? That what you're writing now, you'll be able to modularly create an Algebra 1 course or a geometry course to fit that need.
Possibly, yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot in a lot of ways, but that's good.
Just get it one book at a time, but yes, we could potentially. And one thing I will say though about Jacobs is that I do really love how he does show the math in action too still. So even though it's not as focused on apologetics, it does still, like they're not going to go through that curriculum and wonder, what all these X's and Y's mean.
Right.
It will be preparing them for applying it.
So what will the prerequisites be to go into that course? Like, will they need algebra and geometry? Would they be able to go from like an algebra into algebra 2? What would the recommended sequence be, that you think?
So the recommended sequence would be algebra, then geometry, then algebra 2, but you could go straight from algebra 1 to algebra 2. The geometry will not be required for the algebra 2 part, but it gives students an extra year to kind of be working with algebraic equations in a geometric setting before they've been to the algebra 2. So that would be the standard sequence, but you certainly could go from algebra 1 right into the algebra 2.
Okay. I think Jacob's algebra is definitely pretty comprehensive for an algebra 1 course. Compared to some of the algebra courses that might be available that are a little softer for homeschool right now. If you do Jacobs, you're going to be very well prepared moving into the higher level mathematics. I mean, I would put that on par as one of the stronger courses. If they were coming, say, from a teaching textbooks algebra, would they? What would you think in that? I know it would really depend on how well the student understood the materials, because I know they don't do as much. I've been amazed. We had a number of our students do teaching textbooks, algebra, and I was amazed to see my son doing Jacobs. It felt like just a higher level mathematic. What the concepts he was learning, the graphing, the geometry that he was having to learn in that was far more than I had to learn, or that I saw learned with, just X equals. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I think a lot of it with Jacobs is that he has you think critically. He's not just having you memorize the formulas or the how to manipulate these letters as much as he is making you think. And so it's that thinking that is more of a preparation really for applying math.
Yeah.
So that's what I really think is a strength of the Jacobs curriculum. But I would say if they're coming from any Algebra 1 course, they should be okay starting the Algebra 2, so long as they understood the basics of algebra. And we'll be reviewing some at the beginning of the course.
Okay, that's good to know.
But yeah, I think as long as they understand algebra and they know basically how to manipulate equations and stuff, they should be okay.
Okay. And so that's set to be printed spring of 2020. Next
Correct.
spring.
Well, yes, pray for us, be right. But yes.
So we pray the marriage survives through a writing process.
Yes.
Sometimes that's harder than, as Joyce Meyer said, for better or for worse, but not for lunch. And I never understood that until I stopped. I went home to work. And Kristen was like, I think it's time for you to go back and work in an office somewhere away from here. So I'm here. So just so Kristen can have a break from me. Some people send their kids to school so that they can have a break from their kids. In our home, my wife sent me to work so she could have a break from me. So she has me in a Christian work environment, but it's she just needed that time, I guess. So. All right, I digressed. I'm sorry. Good. Anything else? What a privilege it is to work with us, all of those things. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go?
I mean, I got to use some of your materials when I was growing up in homeschooling and science and stuff. And so I'm just really excited to be a part of helping to expand that. And I appreciate you guys. Yeah. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Those were really helpful. If I didn't address it, I'll try to go back in and comment on there. I think we covered, I think we covered most of I think we had one question on there about gifted students. And I would just say that the program, both the junior high and the high school, will work for gifted or special needs students, because it's really, if you understand the concept, it'll help those who are struggling, but it'll also help those who are gifted be able to get a leg up on seeing how they're going to apply it in physics and science. So I've heard good feedback from students on both sides of that who have used the program. Let me just skim through my notes to make sure there wasn't anything else.
Just so you know, there's a lot of people commenting that have purple and green towels in their bathroom.
Oh, really?
So,
good.
so yeah, you actually, I have green towels too, so I guess it's kind of a theme right now. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
There was one other question on the algebra course was if it would have a DVD or e-course component, and we are hoping to add that at some point. So that is our plan, but
okay.
we don't have that date for that yet.
Okay. I just wanted to go back a little bit. You grew up, your family, they traveled, right, for Answers in Genesis? Like, did you guys do conventions and that type of thing?
Yes, my dad is a volunteer for them. He goes to homeschool conventions and sells materials for them.
Okay.
And growing up, we would go and volunteer at different conferences.
So the worldview that you have definitely supports. I mean, you grew up in, and everything you support is the same as Master Book's worldview of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The biblical authority and the biblical model goes to a young earth, and then the catastrophe and all that we see is from a biblical standpoint.
Right, and within the math curriculum, it's building that. So like when they learn about exponents at one point, they actually look at carbon dating and the fallacies in there, and they get to see, how they're, using the math and how the assumptions are faulty that's going into it. And so yeah, it's bringing that in there as they go through stuff.
Yeah. I've even been kind of bold in saying this, but I've said, I think if you did principles of mathematics, you could even be as bold as to say that it's not just a math course, but you could apply it as a Bible course. You might want to supplement a little bit, but there's enough Bible in there and enough application brought to it that a parent could kind of consider that as a Bible course. Have you ever?
Worldview course.
As a worldview? Yeah.
Worldview.
Yeah. Which application, again, it's application. And I find that, so many times people will, like I would take, when I pastored, I would take a Facebook post, I'd put it up on the screen, and then we basically would dissect the worldview and then apply a biblical worldview on top of it. And all of a sudden that application of scripture and biblical content in a real world situation made scripture feel that much more alive than just here's the scripture, apply it to your life, or here's the scripture and then not really breaking into the worldview and the application. So I think in some ways doing it from a worldview context, especially at that age, I think it were wise to do that in junior high because it really does settle those big questions that students have.
Well, and if you really realize that God is in charge of every single atom out there, and he's causing this universe to operate by the power of his word so predictably that we can use math and rely on it to work because of how reliable he is, he's going to be just as faithful to everything else he says in his word. And so it just really brings home the fact that you can trust his word and that you can take it to the bank and rely on it completely, and helps with our worry and with our pride. And so my favorite testimony was when someone shared that their child had come to know the Lord as they were working through the math curriculum, just because it does constantly bring them back to that, God is true, and we see it in the fact that the very consistencies that are all around us are shouting that out to us, and we can trust them.
Yes. So I have a personal testimony with it. The concept to me was just mind-blowing. I came into Master Books right about the same time Principles of Mathematics came in, right? 2015, I think, was about the time you were writing. And so one of my first kind of projects was beginning to launch that. And up until that point, nobody had really made that argument that math is this language that God uses, and that when I see 2 + 2 = 4, I understand that there's a consistency in that, a trustworthiness in that, and it's because the designer displays that trustworthiness. So fast forward to our current season of life, and you're just looking for, where is God? Where is God in the dark times, in the valleys? And I've gone to that 2 + 2 = 4, and one of the things that the Lord spoke was, he spoke, the first thing he spoke was, "Let there be light." And every morning when I wake up and I see the sunrise, and I just know that that light is consistent, I can count on it. That was the first place that we see him speaking something and knowing that when he spoke it, it's going to be consistent time and time again. And that really came from, for me, that faith builder, if you will, came from the principles of mathematics. So in our current season of life, that is bringing me a lot of comfort. So I do appreciate that very much. Okay. So we don't often realize that the things we do don't just impact 7th and 8th graders, but they also impact moms and dads, marketing people, store owners. I mean, just you name it. Every place seed gets planted, when it's a work that God has, he does prosper it. So thank you very much for your obedience and for the heart that you have for homeschoolers, homeschool families, to show the glory of God. That is such a huge task in a world like this, but I believe God is honoring that.
Praise God. I'm so thankful for you guys and your willingness to step out there and publish materials that are doing that. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, we'll watch the post if there's any more questions. You're part of the group, so I know you'll see if there's anything that can be answered. Kate also has a website, and she does offer an e-course. So I know students have been blessed by that struggled to have some teaching as well in that course, and so she'll post a link to that in the comments as well. So if anybody's interested in that, we'd encourage you to check that out for sure. And if you're not using Principles of Mathematics, I guess the biggest question would be, why not? But we'd encourage you to check it out and just see all that it has. Ask questions in this group, because there are people who have used it, and it has definitely changed their homeschooling experience in the areas of math and junior high, and preparing their students, their high school students and whatnot. So, hey guys, it is an honor and a privilege to serve you and to partner with you in raising up this generation to advance the kingdom of God. Awesome stuff. God bless you and have a fantastic day, and we will see you later this week on Thursday.